So we had a few different possibilities insofar as what we might pick up next for the, I guess, third Urphänomen study group. But we decided to take up the Interdisciplinary Astronomy lecture cycle. That's what it's published as, Interdisciplinary Astronomy. And I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me before, but I was so excited upon making that decision or suggesting it. Or maybe it was you. I can't remember which one of us it was initially.
But I think it was me. But
okay, yeah.
You liked it immediately, so
yeah. Well, because it
became your idea.
We've both. I've listened to it, the recordings that Dale Brunswald has made twice, and I think you have as well, or you've read them already. You've listened and read. It's wonderful to listen to, but there's also lectures, especially like after like the second half, that include like graphics. I think most of them include figures, but like where he's talking about curves and geometry in a way that you would really need to see it, or at least I do. And so I'm also really excited to be doing this as a group for that reason, because I'm excited to hear what all the different people who come with very different backgrounds have to say about this study. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it's a special or unique approach to the subject, right?
Yes, yeah. Because it, you know, he describes it, one of the little summaries for one of the lectures was saying that, he says, it's not meant to be a revolution in astronomy, but a methodology that serves to integrate the human form with the cosmos. And so it integrates everything in our lives and around us with the cosmos.
And normally, natural science is the attempt to explain nature as though it existed independently of the human.
Yeah.
Just external to us, separate from us, going on mechanically without anyone needing to be there to attend to or experience it. And
as if we weren't, our knowing of this process, historical, I guess, evolutionary process, weren't being mediated by ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then, you know, we treat nature as this external machine that we can reverse engineer and control and master. And then we think of ourselves, I mean, our bodies obviously are part of that nature, so where medicine is basically the attempt to master and control the various systems of organ systems and more complex non-local systems of the body using reductionism. And, you know, like, we think of all of our senses as just totally random, contingent, you know, survival mechanisms that actually have no intrinsic relationship to the rest of the natural world and the rhythms of the cosmos. Like, that our eyes, our ears are just sort of what happened to allow our ancestors to survive in a battle to the death with other organisms on a crowded planet. Whereas Steiner's allowing us to see how our senses are actually attuned to the world. The world called them forth.
Yeah.
The rhythms of the orbs, the beings in the sky are in sync with, we are in sync with those rhythms. Like, our embryological development and our growth into adulthood is intimately interwoven with the heavenly movements.
Yeah. And like what is true for like one human being, like in their process of being conceived and going through embryogenesis and birth and then the aging process is you know, this is a kind of phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, right? Like of the earth. And the whole history of humanity, the way he presents it. Oh, really?
But you could, I mean, it's an interesting thing to flip it too, to phylogeny recapitulates. But I think ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. If you say phylogeny capitulates ontogeny, then it's more like you're giving a
Oh, I see.
developmental telos to
Yeah.
the process of speciation, which but that's like what Teilhard does. So
Yeah.
rather than saying that the development of the individual, ontogenesis, is just repeating random evolutionary steps that
I guess
occurred
I was
before.
thinking of the development of the individual as also the development of the whole universe. That's what I thought ontogeny was referring to.
Well, that's Steiner's whole point, though.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That the embryo and the cosmos as a whole are corresponding entities.
Yeah.
You cannot understand one without the other. And so that's the Steinerian position, the anthroposophic position, right? You can't understand the universe as a whole independent of the birth of life in the cell.
Yeah.
And that's so different than how physicists and biologists think about their relationship. For the most part, there are some who are coming around, but most physicists and biologists think of their disciplines as totally separate things.
Yes, it's this experience of fragmentation, like in random, arbitrary existence,
Right.
like, and especially when when there's this assumption that our form is purely like an expression of survival, like then, yeah, it's considered still arbitrary, random, apart from being like, what's the word? Selecting for domination.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing I wanted to say was that I think that this lecture cycle is really great because, for those who are like not interested in the like more esoteric aspects, even though it's very esoteric in a way, it's not like he doesn't bring a lot of anthroposophical concepts in, and it's like a kind of, I feel like a bridge between the more
Secular.
esoteric and people who are interested in Goethean science, and it's just very accessible. I mean, you really have to like imagine, you have to like, I guess, think actively or listen or read actively and work your imagination. But and some of the math stuff, like I've not quite grokked. That's why I'm excited to read it and talk about it with other people who might understand those aspects better. But I was thinking of what Steiner says after having recently read The Philosophy of Freedom and kind of thinking about esoteric science, and I think even How to Know Higher Worlds introduction, I can't remember, but basically when he talks about like, you don't have to believe what a spiritual researcher says, but for him, this is the way he thought about what he wrote, especially esoteric science, that if perhaps like what is being reported is true in some sense, to have the concepts allows you to maybe test them and then potentially to grow into the world, to individualize the concepts, as he would talk about in The Philosophy of Freedom. And I found that after listening to this lecture cycle twice, like it definitely like transformed my perception of my experience on the earth.
Of the year.
I mean, especially working with the calendar of the soul, but also, of the year, definitely. But more than just that, the moon and the relationship of the plants to the cosmos.
Yeah, it's a phenomenology of time, you could say.
It's very ecological, but in a way that extends the earth beyond the environment beyond the earth.
Yeah.
Which is so cool.
Most of the math is geometry, right? And like topology, you might say. And the logic of knots and
yes, I think
surfaces.
If you can, it's imaginative, I guess. I mean, I guess all math is. But
it absolutely is.
But this is more. There's like a pictorial, I guess I should say, character
diagrammatic,
to it,
yeah.
that isn't always present in mathematics. Would you say it's not always pictorial?
Geometry is definitely intimately tied to drawing.
But not all math is
diagramming.
Geometry.
No,
I guess I just meant not all math is pictorial, but yeah.
Even arithmetic needs symbols, though. So
some is musical.
Without pen and page, whether it's wax tablets or pen and ink or digital screens, that seems to me necessary for mathematical reasoning. Like, very few humans can do it just in their head. And now, of course, we have computers and stuff, but
Yeah.
Math requires higher math certainly requires writing of some kind, whether analog or digital, handheld or mind meld, whatever. But yeah, I think this isn't a revolution, as you were saying, in astronomy, but it is putting the models of astronomy and physics and biology into context with this new interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, really, vision of all of natural science as a unity, which requires not just unifying physics, biology, psychology, sociology, or whatever, but also, like, seeing the unity of the human being with nature.
Yeah.
And that means all of our inner soul life, our emotional depths, our conceptual capacities, our imaginative, creative inner landscapes, like, that's nature unfolding within us. So nature is not just particles of matter colliding. It's not that at all, actually. Like, every I mean, nature does come in these parcels of, like, of units of entitative individuation, like the human individual, but also, like, atoms seem to have some individuality to them, and cells certainly have some individuality, and so that's a principle at work at every level in nature. And so the unity is, like, the unity of the human with nature is just the unity of nature with mind, with, like, the mind as the tendency to individuate, the tendency toward unity, which can't be denied. Like, even if you're an atomist, like Newton, like, you need a deistic God who created those atoms, created the laws of physics that have mathematical unity. Like, the unity has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
If you don't want to give any of it to nature, then you give all of it to God. Like, okay, that seems a little imbalanced to me, though. But Newton didn't seem particularly healthy.
He had to repress it.
I mean, what do I know? I'm not trying to diagnose Isaac
Well, I just
Newton.
mean, like, in one of the first iterations of this recording, I mentioned that you had described the mechanical model of the universe when taken for the whole truth as a delusion, and I think that's accurate when it's taken for the whole truth. But I was mentioning how Steiner, in one of these lectures, talks about so it's not only, like, being integrated in the cosmos, but also to be reintegrate in, like, cosmic evolution. So, like, the world picture of the cosmos at a given time in human history has a kind of it's like an emblem of the character of that evolutionary phase. And so he was saying that what was it that prompted me to bring this up? Sorry.
Evolutionary benefit of materialism as
Well, I guess I don't know if I would say benefit, but
challenge. Evolutionary challenge of materialism.
When I say repress, he repressed it. I don't mean, like, in a kind of psychoanalytic way necessarily, but, like, that this kind of this mechanical world picture was like a kind of it was constellated by the development of new capacities that are connected with the physical body. And I guess the consciousness, so Steiner describes it, but this is kind of getting in the weeds. But, like, what Gebster would call, like, the mental, you know, like...
Yeah, no, the human mind
conquering
became so
of space.
Individuated that it like...
Emancipation.
It emancipated itself from space and time.
Yeah, from the world organism, yeah.
It thought it was outside.
Yeah, so which is a kind of death. And that's how Steiner talks about it. Anyway, kind of getting into the weeds, but yeah. Yeah,
and then there's this whole part in this lecture cycle about mathematics and this modern, like, Faustian rage against disorder and attempt to reduce the whole of the movements of nature to some equation, to calculate it all perfectly with no remainder, so that you can predict as far off into the future as you want, assuming you could know the present position of everything, which is, measurement's not easy. But this drive for calculative mastery is like it really is a demonic, it's Ahriman, right? It's like, it is this demonic enchantment, but evolutionarily inescapable.
Well, I think it just depends on how it is deployed. Like, I don't know that, like, the drive necessarily is bad on its own.
Mm-hmm. But Steiner's saying we have to let go of the demand for certainty in the calculation, because the planetary orbits...
Commensurability, because that's a testament, or that's like a feature of the dead.
Planetary orbits are alive.
The dead as in the inorganic.
Yeah, but the planets, their motions are, you would say, irrational. There are irrational numbers produced when you try to actually to calculate their exact motions. And
this is one of the things he gets into.
No two orbits are the same.
Yeah.
Every time the Earth goes around the sun, it's doing it differently in the same way, but differently.
Through astrology, you can recognize patterns in history, but you're also like experiencing things that have never happened before exactly the same way. So like that's like it's evident there, but it's not in the typical scientific world picture.
So the astronomer's attempt to measure and mathematize the sky is valid, and that's a pursuit that can lead us deeper into truth. We discover the rhythms that shape our own lives here on Earth, like down to the daily and then the lunar and then the yearly, the annual cycles, like these rhythms which we track in the sky, and then deeper rhythms with the planets and the galaxy. That's all super important, but it's that attempt to measure and calculate is never going to resolve or explain the whole of it.
Well, in Barfield's terminology, it's the difference between dashboard knowledge and participant knowledge. So like the dashboard knowledge, the only thing that's really that useful about this is kind of like the whole significance of like the changing of the word hypothesis, for like the whole epicycle thing, it wasn't really a big deal, right? It was a big deal to the extent that they needed to save the appearances, but they didn't really care about the epicycles themselves as like, or it wasn't taken as like a true exhaustive characterization
Ptolemy didn't think this is how God was doing it. He just thought it was a practical way of keeping track.
Well, that the truer reality is the spiritual reality of the spheres, whereas now in modern science, the true reality is like the confirmed hypothesis. Yeah, and so that's like useful to us technologically, but like that's not knowing it. You know?
Yeah, hypotheses are always models that...
It's not participating it, which is what you're describing, and which Steiner, like the significance of the incommensurabilities of the calculating the planetary movements and the fact that it's like a living system.
Yeah.
That's not a crystalline.
I think with the Big Bang model being challenged by the James Webb Space Telescope's, observations of galaxies larger than they should be, earlier than they should be, based on the Big Bang model. I think this is an opportunity not to ask like, oh, well, what's the right model then? We got to find the right model. It's like, well, obviously we can find better ways of mathematizing and measuring the sky, but if we're not including ourselves in the picture, if we're thinking of the universe as something fundamentally out there, separate from what we think of as consciousness and the human realm of like meaning and value and beauty and goodness and truth, including the truth of science, like if we're still trying to define and explain the universe that way, then who cares? It's the point. It doesn't matter whether it's the Big Bang model or some other model. It's like we're just treating the universe like a bunch of ideas to bat around. Like it doesn't really matter for our actual existence, like psychologically.
Yeah.
spiritually and physiologically.
That's why I find a lot of like the astronomical or astrophysics terms to be kind of alienating.
Well, they are.
Yeah, because like I'm like I still don't know what you're talking about. Like dark matter. I think it has a mythic quality for those who aren't completely like, well, you know.
Well, if you're
for
not,
whom the scientists are the priests.
if you're not doing the math, then of course it has a mythic quality.
Yeah, well, and I mean, just the word, you know, dark matter.
But when the mathematicians talk about it, it immediately becomes myth for them too.
Yeah.
So it's not like
it is myth for them, but they don't realize that.
No. But they reach for the concepts that are available to describe the mathematics.
And it's very poetic, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, it is. I mean, that's the problem, though. Like, science can't but be poetry. And
exactly.
When the scientist attempts to describe nature,
it's bad poetry.
You're gonna use metaphor. Show me a scientific hypothesis or theory or a model that's not rooted in a metaphor. And so there's a rhetorical component to measuring and mathematizing, because we want to understand. We want to talk to each other about what it is that we're measuring and counting. And so it needs to have a mythic dimension, a story, a poetic basis.
Yeah.
Because nature is a poem, right?
Yeah.
Nature is...
It's a song, it's a poem, it's a drama, it's a... lots of things.
Not that you can't distinguish between art and nature, but art is just...
What did
nature educated?
Goethe say about... What did
nature awakened.
What's that line, that great quote? He said, something like, when you understand nature, you want to make art, or something like that.
Sounds right. Whitehead has this quote, which I won't get exactly right, but he says, "The first unconscious act of the speculative imagination is the creation of the world. Figuring out how it has been done is the task of philosophical consciousness."
That's great, because I feel like that connects philosophy or speculative thought with all cosmologies, all cosmological myth making and song, and it's like right there. The world is calling it forth.